Alright people, let's talk about one of my absolute passions in life, languages. And what a language really is. And I think this is something that language learners aren't really thinking about. Maybe they should, maybe it could influence their choice in what language they pick to learn. And I wanted to make this whole fancy video outside with a lot of different scenes and B-roll, but now it's cold outside and I need a mask if I can't avoid people. And yeah, I just thought it would be easier to make the video here, and hopefully, even if it's not visually appealing to you, what I've got to say might be interesting. So stay with me. So what is a language? Well, obviously, if you understand each other, you're speaking the same language. But I think that this theory can be debunked very easily if you look at Swedish and Norwegian. These are two languages that are very intelligible. It's super easy to understand someone from Norway compared to Danish. All right? And the thing is that Swedish and Danish, they are on the East Scandinavian or East Norse branch, or East North Germanic, all right? They are related. And Norwegian is West Scandinavian, together with Icelandic and Faroese. But even then, Norwegian and Swedish are two Scandinavian languages that are the easiest to communicate between, all right? Danish is a lot harder, but it's because they pronounce things differently. And Sweden and Norway are close to each other, so you get the influence of the proximity there. Also, the Norwegian, written Norwegian, and I know what you're thinking, if you're Norwegian especially, but I will get to this later in this video. Written Norwegian is very close to written Danish, because the country of Norway is pretty young, and the Danes have been in Norway. The Swedes have been in a union with Norway. So the language, the administrative language in Norway was Danish, and so the written language got influenced there. The same happened in Finland with Finnish, and it's not even a Scandinavian language, not even a Germanic language, but they have a lot of Swedish loans there, some grammatical structures, and so on. And some translated loans, kind of hidden loans, but you can see that they are Swedish because no other language has it, for instance. Got a bit sidetracked there. So you can see, it doesn't matter if you understand each other, doesn't mean that you're speaking the same language. Obviously, if you have the same grammar then, the grammar should be a clue, should tell you that you are speaking the same language. Well, not really. If you take Norwegian and Swedish, they are very closely related. But there are some grammar that, if you think about it, could be something a Swede would say in their dialect. And maybe even if the dialect is close to the Norwegian border, if the village there is close to that, then you have this kind of continuum, right? So you have a difficult time to tell if it's Norwegian or Swedish. So Norwegian grammar is different than Swedish standard grammar. But it might work for some dialects. So really, just because they defined that as that doesn't mean that another language did not, and yeah. So it's better to take a look at German and Swiss German. Swiss German. It's German, right? It's no-brainer. Well, is it though? Is it? Because the dialects, let's call them dialects, spoken in Switzerland, the German dialects, are so far from High German that even the grammar differs. But they say that they speak German, or Swiss German dialect. But we in Scandinavia, we say that we speak different languages, Norwegian and Swedish here, for instance. But they say they don't. And this also shows how unnatural a standard language can be. They use High German, that is a standard that has been artificially decided on, basically. They use that officially. They use that in communication with movies. They get German dubs. But it's a language that they have to learn in school because in their family they speak their dialect. And the dialects, if you look closely, you can see that the grammar differs a little bit from High German. It's not just that they reduce a lot and sound so that the words sound different. No, they use another vocabulary. Also not weird for a dialect, but they use other vocabulary, but also other grammar structures. But it's still German, because it has been decided that it's German. What is a language? When is a language a dialect and when is it a language? It's not that easy to say. So obviously if you use the same written language, then that's a language, right? Yes, could be. But you could also write in dialect. But that's your choice. It's something they like to do a lot in Finland when writing Swedish. The Swedish-speaking Finns, they like to write in dialect. Germans, some Germans at least, like to write in dialect with each other, with their friends. The Swiss do that, the Austrians do that, for instance. But they have learned a standard language. But you could actually say that that's its own language in a way. And this is especially true for Finnish, because spoken Finnish is pretty different from written Finnish. Not only grammar, but how some words work and how you would say certain things. And when speaking about Norwegian, the Norwegians actually have two official written languages. I say official because there are more, but one, bokmål, is more influenced by Danish. And then we have one, nynorsk, that is created to mirror other dialects than those mirrored or close to bokmål in that regard. But they aren't different languages, right? So a written language does not dictate that that's the language. That's what I mean. You can compare this to Japanese. They have 3 different ways of writing Japanese that they use together at the same time. Bokmål and nynorsk, they aren't used at the same time, but the Japanese ones are. So it's not exactly the same thing, but you see here that a written language can't dictate what a language really is. It's hard to tell, really, if you're speaking a standard language and then you're speaking what is considered a dialect, like the Swiss, but the grammar is different. Are you really speaking the same language? Something to think about. So if you use the same written language, yes, we could say that if you are using the same language, right? But it doesn't mean that the dialect you speak or you use every day is really the language you use when you're typing or writing. A bunch of years, Latin was the only written language in Scandinavia, for instance, or in Europe, and so on. It was the written language, and all other languages, they were just used in speech in your village with your family and so on. But those aren't dialects of Latin, right? So what you write is not necessarily the same thing as you're speaking. That's what I wanted to say. It's just something to think about. We could say that the written language decides that something is a language, but is the dialect that you're speaking really the language? That's the question. If we go from that theory to another theory, if you call your language the same thing as everyone else, obviously you're speaking the same language. And we had this interesting thing with Africa and the tribes there, and the Western linguists and researchers and scientists, they came there and asked, what is this language? And the people there, they didn't know what to answer. So they just said something like, well, language in their language, or something like that. And that was good enough for the scientists. They went to the next village, and the people there said the same thing, slightly different. And this caused a bit of a problem, because now we have 50 languages, I don't know the numbers, but we have a bunch of languages with basically the same name, but with different spellings, depending on who was the researcher and who listened and who wrote it down. All right? But it's also the other way around. Maybe some related dialects said that you have basically the same name for language. But the languages or dialects are so far apart that they aren't really that close. You can take Finnish and Estonian here as an example. The word for language, kieli, and kiel, or however you say that in Estonian. I think that's how you say it. Pretty similar words. So you can think, okay, so those are dialects. Well, a Finn could not understand an Estonian just without any education, without learning any Estonian. There are too many false friends and other things that are very different, like the Estonian is heavily influenced by German and so on, and they both have a lot of vocabulary that is not the same. So maybe you can understand a third. That's something I've heard, for instance. A third of what the Estonians say, and 1/3 are false friends, and 1/3 is gibberish to a Finn. So, as you can see, we have this problem then in the African, with the African languages then, or wherever these tribes were. You have a bunch of languages that now are or you have one language and dialects that are now different languages, and then you probably have a bunch of languages that are now basically the same. So, even if you call your language the same as the other people, doesn't mean that your language is the same language. This brings me to my last point in this little rant, or it's not a rant, it's just something to think about. It's the political aspect, because it's almost always the politics that will decide if it's a language. The thing with Switzerland, we have the Germanic language that is spoken there that is more closely related to I don't know, it's not like High German. That's what I wanted to say. It's pretty far apart from High German. And then we have Darlecarian or Elfdalian, Älvdalska in Sweden, spoken in Dalarna. It's more closely related to Old Norse than to Swedish. Obviously, it has been influenced by Swedish. And Sweden considers it a dialect. It's a Swedish dialect, but it's incomprehensible to someone that hasn't learned it. So as you can see, my last point, the politics. It's, in the end, the thing that decides what a language is and what a dialect is. I hope that you got something to think about here. I really do, because I think it's very interesting. And let me know in the comments down below if you speak a language that is basically another language if you go past all the emotions, right? Or if you speak a dialect that you think should be considered its own language, and why. That would be very interesting. Please let me know in the comments down below. And if you like videos like this, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel, and I will know that you want more of this. All right? Until next time, take care. See you. Bye.